little over 8 years ago, I was on my way to work, and heading into the New York subway, I passed out. And when I was going into the subway, I had worked out that morning. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew that I wasn't feeling normal. I passed out, I went to work and treated it as if it was a completely normal day. I saw some signs throughout the rest of that day and the next day that showed that something wasn't right. And so I went to the doctor the day after and had some tests done. They drew some blood and they saw that I was, I had really low counts. And as a result, they went in and did an endoscopy. And in doing so, they found a bleeding ulcer. And that bleeding ulcer showed that I was bleeding out and I had lost almost half my blood internally. And when they were looking around, they saw a small polyp. And they claimed at the time that it was inflamed tissue, but we knew something at that day that something was wrong. A year later is when I was diagnosed. I'm sitting there with the doctor, and the words can barely get out of his mouth that he is as shocked as I am. At 23, I was being diagnosed with esophageal cancer. I didn't drink excessively, I didn't smoke, I didn't have acid reflux, I wasn't overweight, I was normal, I was healthy, and this happened to me.
The day of my diagnosis is definitely a day you don't forget for the rest of your life. And it was September 6th, 2011. And I went for an endoscopy. Why was I having an endoscopy? I was having one because I was having lower GI problems. And my GI doctor was bright enough to say, hey, you know, you've been having heartburn for a long time. Let's get an upper GI as well. Let's do an endoscopy. So they did an upper GI, they did a scan is what they did, lower and upper. And they noticed a thickening of the esophagus. So they said, we're going to get an endoscopy. And I remember saying to my doctor before the endoscopy, telling me I have esophageal cancer? She says, I'm not telling you that, I don't know. I said, because if you are, you're giving me a death sentence. And she said, well, that's where you're wrong.
So my awareness of esophageal cancer was extremely low. I didn't even know it existed. I mean, practically, I figured that anything can have cancer, but no idea that the esophagus could have cancer. For a young man like me, I thought it was going to be testicular cancer, if anything, but esophageal cancer, had no clue that that existed. And then in the days following, when I was doing some research on the internet, it was just the dark, deep corners of the internet that have nasty comments about it. It doesn't even talk about the outcome, what to expect. They just talk about the high mortality. And I remember in that period, I couldn't find anyone to talk to. I couldn't connect with any survivors. And I felt alone.
You know, I hit the internet once, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is nothing but doom and gloom. These statistics are horrible. What the heck is going on here? And I was scared out of my wits. To me, it was about my mental state. I think if I got into the statistics, my mental state would have gone south. And I think there's a huge flaw. I'm an accountant. So I think there's a huge flaw in the way those statistics are compiled. And I just think they have stage 4 in there, they have a stage 1 in there. They don't go by geography, they don't go by age group. There's just a whole bunch of factors that are not. So when people are reading those statistics and they see a 20-30% survival rate, it's just not correct, in my opinion.
I can remember the feelings from that day. I sunk into my chair and I remembered having really this thought of being able to be afraid, to be concerned and ask questions of blaming someone else, or just biting down and trying to fight the disease. And I chose the grit to go after it. But that day, it hit me pretty hard. And it wasn't until a few weeks later that I could get staged and actually understand what it meant to have esophageal cancer. At the time, it just meant I was being consumed by this dark, nasty word. Today I know it's something very different. Today I know that esophageal cancer is a wide range of things. And it's only after you get to that staging period that you can feel comfortable with what your expectations are. The darkest days are those days between you have esophageal cancer and understanding what stage you are.
So is it a rough treatment plan? Man, I had a rough time with it. It definitely is. The chemotherapy for me was rough. The radiation for me, honestly, was a non-event. I went for 6 weeks, Monday through Friday. You get in, they take you very quickly, you're out very quickly, non-event. Chemotherapy, not so much for me. I was in the hospital a few times with that, but it helped. So when I had my PET scan, which they'll do before they'll do the surgery, they want to make sure that tumor has shrunk and they're looking for other things, and it had shrunk quite a bit. And I went in for my esophagectomy, which is the removal of the esophagus and the stomach getting moved up.
My treatment plan included the Ivor Lewis minimally invasive esophagectomy, where they removed 80+% of my esophagus and over a quarter of my stomach. Following that, I had 6 months of chemotherapy. And in that, I was really fortunate that I tolerated it well. And every single patient that I've talked to, every single survivor, deals with it differently. Some are able to eat normally very quickly. Some it takes a long time. For me, I'm really fortunate that I can eat normal-sized meals again. I can eat whatever food I'd like. And in the chemotherapy, yeah, there's all the things that you'd expect. And it goes away. Over time, you recover, and your body goes back to normal.
The recovery from the esophagectomy took me a long time. Between being home a little bit, being back in the hospital, being home a little bit, being back in the hospital, I was in the hospital about 2 months collectively.
I had to take a step back. I took a year off to make sure I got healthy. And that's a critical point in a young man's career. That said, I was able to bounce back and take advantage of everything that I learned and developed from that. This cancer was a great maturization and a great gift for me. As a result, I matured so much that coming out of chemotherapy, I made some incredible relationships, I treated people better, and I lived my life the way that I wanted to.
You get into this mode of constantly going, and things can get disheveled quickly in a person's life, and priority items don't become the priority. And cancer allowed me to reevaluate that. There's a lot of things. I really very much cherish time with my family. The boat is a tremendous place where the family bonds even more. You know, we're out on the water. I cherish those days. And I cherish every day that I wake up and say, thank you, it's good to be here, and I'm blessed.
Life for me right now is wonderful. I have my health, I have my wife, and I'm starting a family. I am so lucky to be alive.
So I come in and they said, hey, come in the conference room. Well, I go in the conference room and they have 2 of the biggest baskets filled with anything and everything you would ever think you would need for chemotherapy and radiation treatment and just comforts. I mean, everything was in there. And the other thing they did, they had 2 other things made up for me. One of them is this band that I put on in September of 2011 that I haven't taken off since then, nor will I. And what this band says that my colleagues got for me, one side says Karen's Army, and the other side, which is a motto I live by, is never lose hope. When I think about that, I get angry. Angry at the medical community. Angry that, you know what? Gosh darn it, there should be risk factors associated with this. And people should be getting a routine test, just like they do for a colonoscopy, because it is key to early detection.